So the Avalanche of Colorado were playing against the Kraken in Seattle on April 20th, otherwise known as 420. Yeah, somebody at the NHL scheduling office is having a giggle. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken, for the first time in franchise history, win their third consecutive game, beating the Colorado Avalanche, the NHL's best team, 3-2. Now, I will admit, as someone who's cheered for the Avalanche for almost a decade, it does feel a little bit weird to be happy about them losing for the first time in a very long time, if ever. But even if it would have been, technically speaking, better for the Kraken to lose this game, I can't help it. It's just great to see the hometown team win and get that first ever third consecutive win. Not to mention, again, doing it against the best team in the NHL and winning all 3 games at home. Of course, granted, this wasn't a fully powered Avalanche team that was missing some key pieces, but they still had their 2 best players in McKinnon and Makar. Either way, though, the Kraken certainly weren't looking to take it easy on them, especially with Grubauer in goal, eager to get that win against his old team, and the rest of the team riding that energy of the fan base that is still very present and loud in these games, even with the way the season has gone here late in the last few games of the season, especially after having won those 2 previous games at home as well. And if there was one Kraken player who was more motivated than anyone, outside of, again, maybe Grubauer playing against the Avalanche, it was Cole Lind getting back in the lineup after being rested or sat for a game, which, for a young guy trying to make his mark to try to get a spot next season, this is definitely an opportunity that he has been trying to make the most of, and doing a very good job of it that. And with that, Kraken, and Lind in particular, waste no time putting Colorado on their heels right away to start off this game, as just over a minute in, Lind picks up a puck, getting to it first, that bounces off the end boards behind the Colorado net, makes a couple moves in front of the net, and buries the shot, putting it backhand just around Francouz to give the Kraken the 1-0 lead, 1 minute and 12 seconds into the game. And for Lind, who easily could have more goals than he does at this point, it's his 2nd of the season and 2nd of his NHL career. But even with the nice move that Lind puts on Francouz to score this goal, it's almost more interesting how it ends up getting set up in the first place. The pass intentionally put off the end boards that Lind ends up picking up to score with here comes from Will Borgen up by the blue line, which might not sound that abnormal if it wasn't for the fact that I'm talking about the blue line at the Kraken end of the ice. And to be honest, saying he was near the blue line is being a bit generous, as Borgen was almost more in between the face-off circles than anything else when he fires off this puck from deep in the Kraken end, all the way clear down to the other end of the ice untouched, off the end boards up to Lind, who ends up scoring. Now, firing a pass straight to the other end might be risky considering it could have been called icing, but Lind is able to muscle his way past Comfer to get to the puck first, negating the icing, and eventually, obviously, allowing him to score. So even outside of the fact that this is a play between 2 of the younger players on the Kraken roster, outside of Beniers, obviously, and Geeky, it's a nice play by Borgen to see that the possibility is there for this to happen, and then an even better play by Lind to muscle his way past Comfer to get to that puck first, allowing it to not be icing and taken right back to the Kraken end of the ice. Now, yes, this is certainly aided by the fact that it's a complete defensive breakdown by the Avs that allows this to happen in the first place, which is only highlighted by the fact that it's Comfer that Lind muscles his way past, who is a winger for the Avalanche and not a defenseman, but still it's a good play by both Lind and Borgen to take advantage of that defensive lapse by the Avalanche to get this early lead for the Kraken, an important thing to do against a team like Colorado. Oh, and as a kind of funny side note to this goal, though still relevant because it pertains to how the whole play gets set up and the guy that gets the secondary assist, this one in particular is a pretty good demonstration of how secondary assists in particular can sometimes be a bit of a gift to the guy that gets them. And I say that not necessarily to take anything away from Rask, but yeah, he does get kind of a gift handed to him by the scorekeepers on this one. I mean, just look where he passes this puck to Borgen, not to mention the fact that it's a kind of 4-foot pass in the first place in the defensive zone. And on top of that, even if Borgen had just right away whipped this puck down to the other end of the ice for the play to Lind, it still would have been a pretty soft secondary assist. But instead, Borgen takes the puck from here and then wraps all the way down behind the Kraken net, stands there for a while, and then goes up to where he eventually passes the puck down ice to Lind. So again, good for Rask getting the assist on this goal, but again, it's a pretty clear indicator, especially when compared to, let's just say, the no-look pass from Beniers from a few games ago, that not all assists are created equal. Of course, I suppose you could also say the same for goals, with empty netters compared to the crazy stuff McDavid and Zegras have been able to pull off this year. But yeah, back to the game though, the Kraken aren't done just yet. Even after taking this early 1-0 lead, they keep the pressure on the Avs, and just a few minutes later, it pays off when Beniers wins a puck battle along the boards with Donato, gets it out to Eberle, who fires off a shot and scores, putting a perfect shot top corner past the glove hand of Francouz, or actually I think it was the blocker hand of Francouz. Either way, it's a perfect seeing eye shot into the corner, and now 2-0 lead for the Kraken, just over 5 minutes into the game. For Eberle, it's his 19th of the season, and for Beniers, who gets an assist here, his second assist, and now 4 points in 4 games with the Kraken already. So for the Kraken, obviously one of the best starts to a game they've had all season long, now scoring on their first and third shots on goal. Especially one of the better starts when you consider the opponent that they're up against as well. That having been said, it is still the Avalanche, and they can put points up in a hurry if you let them, so for the Kraken, there's no time to let off the gas now. And they don't do that. Well, they don't score another goal in, say, 2 more shots. They do keep the pressure on the Avalanche throughout most of the rest of the first period, and eventually as we get into the final minutes of the first, that pressure from the Kraken does pay off, as once again back into the offensive end of the ice, it's McCann who fires off a shot on net, and it goes off of a couple skates in front, including Yanni Gourds, and into the back of the net to give the Kraken the 3-0 lead. Yeah, it probably is a bit lucky here for the Kraken, but honestly, they've been due for that considering how the first majority of the season went. And on top of that, again, it's going to take a little bit of good fortune, even with good play, to beat a team like the Avs. And the reason for that is demonstrated just minutes later, when Cale Makar in the Kraken end of the ice passes down to Kadri at the goal line, who passes it back up to Makar, and he roofs it into the back of the net. Not too dissimilar from the Eberle shot that scored early in this game, but a little bit harder, and this one is just a tough one for Grubauer to stop. And it makes it 3-1 as we get into the first intermission. Though I suppose it is worth mentioning that the Kraken ended the first period with 2 minutes of power play, which honestly, again, was a pretty good power play for the Kraken, getting a number of shots off on goal, but every time the rebounds went to Avalanche players, who were then able to clear it, and eventually this does get killed off, with 5 seconds of it bleeding over into the second. So then, again, with the score being 3-1 after 1, it was still 3-1 after 2, with the second period that honestly really wasn't all that eventful. The Avalanche do get 2 power plays in it, but both are killed off well by the Kraken, and Grubauer in particular. Really, the highlights of the second period were the goaltending at both ends of the ice. Grubauer finally getting tested after really only getting tested once in the first period, a couple of times here in the second, but he was up to the task each time. And then at the other end of the ice, while it was a pretty tough first period for Francouz in net for the Avalanche, he was honestly fantastic for the rest of this game, coming up with a number of pretty big saves for them, both in the second and third periods. Outside of that, honestly, the only other highlight in this second period was Eberle losing a skate blade early in it after blocking a shot off of said skate blade, and then having to try to crawl along the ice to the bench, eventually getting a little bit of help from the ref behind the play. And even though this did effectively put the Kraken down a man for a little while Eberle tried to get to the bench, it still is kind of entertaining to see an NHL player without a skate blade. It's a good reminder that this game is played on ice, despite how effortlessly the players move around, or most of them do every game. And it did also lead to another kind of funny moment where that skate blade ends up getting kicked into the Kraken net by an Avalanche player, which Grubauer kind of sees, I think, out of the corner of his eye, something go between his legs and into the net. And then he has this, it looks like kind of a moment of panic where he whips around, looks into the back of the net, doesn't see a puck there, so he's just kind of looking around, trying to figure out what the heck just happened, and then said something to the Avalanche player in front of the net, eventually figuring out that it wasn't the puck, it was just a skate blade. Play resumes from there, and nothing really ends up coming of it. The skate blade gets taken out of the net, obviously, at the next whistle, and things are fine, but yeah, a couple of just kind of funny moments there to start off the second. And so, eventually, as we do start the third, again with the score 3-1, honestly, the third period's kind of just more of the same that we saw in the second, with very good defense, especially by the Kraken at that end of the ice, and both teams having that last line of defense in goal be pretty solid, stopping good chances from both teams. Kraken especially doing a good job of breaking up Colorado passes that tried to cross from one side to the other, and keeping guys away from the net, or at least keeping them from getting clean tip-ins or rebound opportunities. That having been said, late in the third, eventually there is one defensive breakdown by the Kraken, and just as the Avalanche are getting ready to pull Francouz from the net, a McKinnon shot from up by the point is saved by Grubauer, but the rebound goes out to Lehkonen, who isn't marked by a Kraken defender, and he's able to put it through Grubauer's legs and into the back of the net to make it a 1-goal game. It's now 3-2 Kraken. It might be worth mentioning here that Grubauer did look like he wanted a replay challenge here for goaltender interference, but honestly, I'm kind of happy they decided not to. I don't really see anything that's at least obviously goaltender interference that led up to this goal by Lehkonen. There's maybe a little bit of something, but certainly didn't look like enough that would have been overturned had Seattle challenged it. And of course, with the NHL, if you're not familiar, if the Kraken were to lose a challenge, then the Avalanche would have gotten a power play, which is certainly not the place the Kraken want to be with a 1-goal lead and then an Avalanche power play with 2 minutes left in the game. Still, the Kraken do manage to survive that remaining 2 minutes of time. McCann barely misses the empty net once Francouz is eventually pulled, and then Grubauer has one good stand with 9 seconds left. The Kraken hold on to win 3-2. Certainly not a game that looked like it was going to end 3-2, especially after the first where 4 of those 5 goals were scored. But either way, the Kraken, and at least the fans in the building, will happily take the win. Again, the first time the franchise has won 3 games in a row, winning all 3 at home and capping it off against the best team in the NHL. Yes, grand scheme, it does hurt their draft lotto odds as they do with this win end up jumping the Philadelphia Flyers, now the 4th worst team in the league, or 4th best odds at that first overall pick. But they're still in the top 4, and there still is chance for them to swap places back with the Flyers. But either way, I think the Kraken will happily take this strong finish to the season and proving to themselves that they do have the pieces to be successful going into next year. Or at least they have the core for it, with, I think, a good amount of change likely to come in this offseason anyway. You know what? That's actually where I want to start with the first of the 3 takeaways from this game. This strong push that the Kraken have had here now in the last few games, or really even the last couple of weeks, and hopefully going on until the end of the season, well, it may end up costing the Kraken 1 or 2 spots in the draft lottery. I think that it's a good thing for the team at this point to prove to themselves again that the core is there to be successful. And going into next season, that confidence is something that, especially with how some of the young guys are playing, will, I think, play a pretty big role in how they could hopefully get off to a strong start for the next year. Not to mention that especially winning these home games, and especially winning these games with the peak in interest around Beniers, is, I think, a very good thing for the future of the fan base as well. Not that there hasn't been a strong fan base behind the Kraken all season long, but it's good to have that extra push here at the end of the season to spark that hope for next year, that it isn't just going to be another one of these bottom feeding type of years. Especially considering the Kraken this year, I think, were better throughout the season than their record might suggest. But for those of you who have been solely focused on the Kraken getting the best possible odds at that first overall pick since they were eliminated from the playoffs, I get that it's frustrating that they've been falling up the standings, I guess you could say, or falling down that order of best odds at that first overall pick. But with that being said, since the Kraken were safely in that 3rd spot, both the Coyotes and Habs, who were already behind them, have lost every single game since then, with the Coyotes having now lost 8 straight and the Habs having lost 6. Of course, the Flyers are once again in a free fall as well, which is how they now find the Kraken leapfrogging them, having lost 6 in a row of their own, while the Kraken have won 3 straight. But that will kind of be the battle between the Kraken and the Flyers, regardless, I think, of what happens around them, to see who gets the 3rd and 4th best odds. Moving on, though, the second big takeaway from this game for me is that strong start that the Kraken got off to. Obviously, you're not going to score 2 goals in the first 5 minutes of any game, regardless of opponent, that frequently, but the Kraken have kind of started to make a trend of this over the last couple of weeks, of getting these fast starts and just in general playing well in the first period. Something that was a rarity, to say the least, throughout the first, 50 games of the season. And when we're talking about trends and things that we hope carry over into next season, the strong start to games that we've seen how over the last month or so, or really I guess just the last couple of weeks, is certainly one of those things that would help them get off to a strong start in a season, would be getting off to those strong starts in games. And the third big takeaway from this game for me is, again, just defense from the Kraken. And honestly, it was the thing that stood out the most to me throughout the course of this game, and certainly the one that was the most consistent over the whole thing. Sure, they do let up almost twice as many shots as they allowed a game ago against Ottawa, where they only allowed 14, But again, the difference between the Senators offense and the Avalanche offense is considerable. So just to put into perspective what the Kraken were able to do defensively against the Avalanche in this game, when looking at shots on goal, they only allowed 27, which isn't necessarily anything to write home about how few shots you allowed. 27 is on the low end, but it's not anything amazing. Although, against the Avalanche, this is only the 13th time this season that they've been held to 27 or fewer chances. And on top of that, they've only been held to less than 25 shots on goal once so far. And until late in this game, that's just what the Kraken were doing, as a good chunk of those shots came in the last couple of minutes, as the Avalanche were pressing at the Kraken end of the ice, and the Kraken were in full defensive mode with that 2-goal lead. But it's not just that the Kraken limited the number of shots that got to the goal, it's how they were able to do that, as they were all night long breaking up passes all over the defensive zone. The Avalanche trying very hard to make Grubauer move from one side of the net to the other, getting those crossing passes across the middle of the ice, and try to get those good scoring opportunities that way. But the Kraken weren't having any of it, always having a defender in the right place at the right time, in the middle of those passing lanes to make sure that nothing could get through to that shooting player for a one-time. Now, personally, I don't know of anywhere that tracks intercepted passes by a defensive team. If you happen to, please let me know down in the comment section. But at least by the eye test, this was easily the game where the Kraken intercepted or blocked the most passes trying to get to another player at the other side of the ice all season long, and by a pretty wide margin at that. And on top of that, even outside of how the Kraken played in the defensive zone, they were very good in the neutral zone and in transition against the Avalanche defensively as well, where they didn't allow any odd man rushes, or at least none that got to the net anyway, and no breakaways against an Avalanche team that can definitely create a number of those over the course of a game. Something that the Kraken have already seen happen twice this season. Which, going back to talking about trends that we'd like to see transition into next year, that is another trend that we've seen really start to take more and more a hold here in the March and April couple last months of the season, where the Kraken have really started cutting back on allowing those odd man chances and breakaways to opposing teams. Something that we were seeing a lot of early on in the season. A large part of the reason that the goaltending kind of had some confidence issues there in the middle of the season. And finally, before we move on to the 3 Kraken stars of the game, an honorable mention takeaway from this game, because it was mentioned by all 3 guys in the press conference, again would just be the Kraken fans. I already talked about it as a takeaway in one of the previous wins here for Seattle at home, but it's something that, again, all 3 of them mentioned, Eberle in particular, saying that these last 3 wins, and really all season long, that they noticed the Kraken fan base being strong behind them, even with how this season has gone for them. Again, definitely something that has been noticed by the guys in the locker room and on the ice, that the fan base has been behind them all season long, in spite of how badly they lose. Regardless of how they play a game or how the season has been going, the fans have been there and loud and making noise anytime the Kraken score or get momentum going towards the offensive end of the ice or a big save. The building has never been empty. Again, with Eberle even going so far as to say that it might be the best fan experience that he's seen in his entire career, which is saying quite a lot coming from a guy that played a few years on the island for New York, which is another pretty rowdy fan base. With that said though, getting to the Kraken 3 stars of the game, my first star is gonna be Cole Lind. Even outside of the goal that he had in this game to start things off, he had a fantastic game for the Kraken. For my money, the best player for the Kraken on the ice tonight. He constantly seemed to be around the puck whenever he was on the ice, and although he wasn't getting the most ice time of anybody, somewhat understandably, he's not a top-line guy, he was making a difference every single chance that he got. My second star of the game, though I certainly understand if you think he should be the first star, would be Philip Grubauer, again getting that win against his old team, as well as just playing fantastic in net for the Kraken all night long, stopping 25 of 27 shots. And again, while he wasn't tested a whole lot in the first period outside of one very good save that he did make, he does get tested pretty well consistently through the back half of the second and a lot in the third, really being the one that ices this one away for the Kraken, even with that late goal that goes through the 5-hole on what he thought was goaltender interference. And it probably shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that ever since the Kraken, like we said, have started cracking down on allowing those odd man rushes and breakaway opportunities that opposing teams get, The Kraken goaltending has definitely started to make some big strides here in the last couple of months, with those save percentages consistently going up. And my Kraken third star of the game, again, is a tough one. As usual with wins, there's a number of guys that you could make a pretty good argument for. As usual, Yanni Gord is certainly one of those. Beniers, again, 4 points in 4 games is not something to go unnoticed, as well as McCann having another great game, Eberle playing well. But I'm going to end up giving this one to Will Borgen, who on the defensive end, I thought had a fantastic game for the Kraken. Again, some good vision setting up that first goal for Seattle, but also doing really well in and around the net and blocking off a number of those passes that the Kraken were able to intercept between Avalanche players. Especially with this being another one of the younger guys that could be a core piece of this team going forward. It was good to see him have a strong game, especially on the defensive end. But with that, as always, I'd love to know who your 3 stars of the game were, what your takeaways are, or just what you thought of this third consecutive win for the first time in franchise history from the Seattle Kraken. Love to hear those thoughts down in the comment section below. And if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. And until next time, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.